Hey, welcome back to JG3 Reviews. My name is James, and here I like to explore the world of fountain pens, ink, and paper. And today it's an ink day. This is FPR's Royal Flush Blue. Now, Fountain Pen Revolution is itself a family-run small business, and they have partnered with another small business to produce these inks. And I've shared with you already the Painted Desert, which was an interesting nature-inspired brown, and now I'm sharing this blue, and you know I like a really good-looking blue ink, especially one with shading and vibrance. And this ink is going to bring us both. So in this test, we're going to look at how it performs on several different types of paper. We'll look at dry times, whether or not it can survive an accidental spill in our water fastness test. And of course, we'll do swatches and chromatography and all that stuff. So why don't you grab whatever it is you're drinking? Mine is just a cup of black Guatemalan coffee, and let's get started. All right, so today let's talk pen first. This is a recently reviewed FPR Himalaya version 2 with their Ultra Flex nib. They're also available in ebonite. I'll put a link to the review in case you didn't catch that in the description below. You know, bottles are just a practical thing. This one is a very practical bottle. Nice and simple, straight cylinder there with a nice wide opening. And as I mentioned in that Painted Desert ink review, I like that because it's just a nice, simple, straightforward bottle, easy to use. Some mentioned in the comments that because of the height, it might be a little unstable, but at least while it's still mostly full, I've not had any problem with stability. But your mileage may vary, and I figure with any ink bottle, you always need to take a little extra care not to knock it over, which I have never done, but I could easily do. So let's do our ink swatch first here, and let you see kind of what that color is. It's really, again, really nice, vibrant blue, and I really do like these kinds of blues. This is the first pass, and if that was all you got out of that, if that was the only color and there was no shading for me, that would already be a winner in my book. But we're going to see more than that. Then we go here, second pass, and a third pass. This is Clairefontaine paper. This is the one that I like to do my tests on as far as water fastness and things like that, shading. Really well-behaved paper, not crazy expensive. What we'll see as that dries is that this ink has some nice shading. Let me show you the writing here, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Now with that flex nib, you'll notice some nice shading. No color variation, but definitely shading. And that nib has enough springiness to it that this is just moderately trying to flex the nib, and you get this much difference in that shading. Really, really looks good. As it's drying, you can see more of what I'm talking about in the big picture. While that continues to dry, let's look at some of our other papers. All right, now here on old school Tomoe River paper, you can see what I'm talking about. This has been dried for a long time, and you see that definite shading and a nice crisp line. Sometimes you might be able to get some sheening, but I don't really see any in my sample here. Maybe at the very, very edges of some of the writing there, like where the R gets thick, you can see a little bit. But overall, I think it looks good. I like how that nib writes. And more skilled hands, you could get really cool writing out of that pen. This is Ayush paper, a little notepad here that I got from them quite a long time ago, and I've really liked their paper. And here, you do get some sheening. Hopefully the camera will pick that up, but there is definite sheening. If you'll look at that R and the Y, you can see it. And that looks really good. And of course, you get the same shading that we've gotten everywhere else. And zero issues on the other side of the paper. Next, we have Ireful paper. And I really like this. It's a made in Japan paper similar to Cosmo or Tomoe River. I think it's decently affordable. You can get it in these loose sheets, which I also really like. And look here, we have definite sheen as well as shading. So that looks really good. It did pull some of last week's review, the chocolate pudding ink, out when I did the little wetness test there, but it looks really good on this Ireful paper. And if you're not familiar with this, check out the link in the description because this has become just a really nice little paper. I'm really glad somebody recommended that in the comments on a past video. Now, a paper that is more widely familiar, this is the Rhodia Dot Grid Notepad, and this has really good shading. Still no feathering, no bleed through, no ghosting, no issues there. We don't really see the sheen that you saw on the Aerofil, but still a well-behaved ink on Rhodia. Now we did get feathering on my Vietnamese composition notepad. I don't see that very often, and it really did surprise me because it didn't do this on any of the papers that I've shown you so far. But it did here. You still get good shading, but you do get feathering on the Vietnamese composition notepad. This one is true red, but you can get these at all the big box stores. And generally, they perform quite well. I did also have both ghosting and a little bit of bleed through. Not as much as the Monteverde chocolate pudding, but it's definitely there. All right, now this is regular copy paper, and this is HP multi-purpose paper. It's a ream I picked up at Walmart just the other day. And what I did is I did do a little bit of flex on the bottom of that R and the first R there, but for the most part, I just wrote with normal pressure. And I did that so that you would know what it was like with a more normal fine pen, let's say, and yet still get a little bit of the flex. And what you get is, of course, the same shading, which is great. You can see that it is a wet writing pen, and you almost get a little sheen here. You don't get feathering problems here. There's a little bit of a rough edge here and there, but not feathering problems. And this really impressed me, I guess more for the paper than for the ink. And that is, look at this, there is not significant ghosting and only a little bit of almost bleed through, definitely show through. That's impressive. So HP multi-purpose copy paper may be a good option. I'm gonna have to test this with more inks to really make up my mind on that entirely. But it did really well with this Royal Flush Blue, which you saw did go through the Vietnamese paper, which most inks don't do. All right, now let's come back to that Clairefontaine. You've already seen the shading properties, no feathering, no issues there. I have done that swatch, which is now dry, and you can see a little bit more clearly the kind of shading you can expect from this ink. And you will get this shading just in normal writing with most pens. And on the Clairefontaine, even with that generous a swatch, no issues on the other side. So coated papers, this ink does quite well with. All right, let's look at dry times, and I will use my handy Timex Weekender there as my timer today. There will be a little bit of flex to this, so it might be wetter than usual. 5 seconds, I would not expect that to be even close to dry, and expectations met. And at 15 seconds, wow, that's still quite wet, isn't it? And at 30 seconds, it's drying. That's about half dry, isn't it? Let's try 60. Surely within a minute. We'll see. All right, after a minute, still wet. Now, I think a lot of that is the function of that flex nib because it does write quite wet. What I'm going to say is it's a little bit of a slow-drying ink. Give it a minute. If you're using a stub nib, maybe a broad or a medium with moderate wetness, you can probably get it dry in a minute. All right, while we're waiting for some of that page to dry still, how about we look at chromatography? This one is quite simple, quite straightforward. You just drew a line there, and you get the typical graying out, and then what? You get blue. You get a lot of a vibrant light sky blue going into a vibrant royal blue, and that's why we get that shading. And yeah, pretty simple story there, but terrific colors. All right, we waited for things to dry so that we can get them wet, right? So, no, I actually wrote this little grid days ago, at least a week. So let's get some water on this thing. You know, you're walking down the street, you spill your coffee. You're sitting at a table, you spill your lemonade. What's going to happen? You're going to have a mess. All right, I've let that sit for a minute and soak in, but you know, you don't want water to damage your writing for very long. So we're going to go ahead and get that up. I'm just going to dab that and see what's left. All right, first, lots of ink there. That's going to be a little bit of a cool blotch chromatography here in a minute, I bet. What have we got? Well, you actually can see where I wrote. It is a bit of a mixed bag. It's going to depend on what you've spilled on it and how long it's there, because what you can see is there are places where that grid is completely gone that I had drawn on there. In the writing, which was wetter than when I made the grid lines, you still have some of that base line. So you can read water test, you can read, can you read this? And here, you can, where I used a little bit of the flex nib, that's very clear. So there is a chance you'll be able to read what you've written and salvage some of it, but there's also a good chance that you won't. I think your shot's about 50-50. The E, for example, here at water test, gone. If that had been the T as well, you might not have a clue what I wrote there. So you got a 50-50 shot. Dry it as quick as you can. It makes no promises of being a documental ink. But again, I've said it before and I'll say it again, it's good to know whether or not you're going to be able to salvage what you wrote if it gets wet. All right, let's wrap this thing up with a few quick details. First, it is a 30 milliliter bottle. I didn't mention that earlier, but you probably read it on the label. Since that's basically an ounce, it's not hard to figure out the price per ounce. You get this bottle for $8.50 at the time of recording. Now, when I bought mine, if you bought it in a 5-pack, that price came down. So consider that if you're wanting a few different colors or to try a lot of their inks. It is, again, made right here in the United States. So for those who are in the United States, that might be a factor you want to consider. And as I mentioned before, it's made by a small family business, and we like that around here and like to encourage that. So support a small family business. Actually, in this case, you'll be supporting two at once. And you're going to get a really beautiful, vibrant blue ink that I think a lot of you will enjoy. Right. With that, what do you think? Do you like Royal Flush Blue from FPR? Do you have experience with it? Tell us what you think. I look forward to hearing from you, and God bless you, and have a great week.